Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So last time, we did a few things, right? We first started talking about stories and how they actually originate from customer interviews and feedback, right? And then we take those stories and we then compile them into features because, after all, we've got to have some basic building blocks, right? So the stories are really what drives the features. And then what else did we say about creating stories? Right, there were some nuances that we had talked about.
All the different types of indications that people give you, whether it's a task to be turned into a story or not.
Fair enough, yeah. So there is that compound task versus vague verbs. What else do we have to think about?
Whether some stories contradict other stories.
Okay, that's possible. So yes, but what else? Nothing else? What's scope creep?
Too many things to do.
Okay. How do you avoid it? Someone besides Krill. How do you avoid it?
Prioritize.
You prioritize. Okay. Is there anything else that you do?
Prototyping? Prototyping?
No, it's before that. So it's really to list all of the stories. It's to get as granular as possible, right? Because sometimes we think we're going to implement something very high level, but keeping things too high level is not always the best way to go, right? We need to make sure that we're as granular as possible. So like if somebody enters an email ID and we have to check that it's a valid email, then we better have a story that says that. Otherwise, who knows how long it'll take for us to just create that one feature, right? So too often this is where, a lot of times people end up not necessarily wasting time, but noticing that there's delays that start to pile up. So it's always important to try to make stories as granular as possible. So that's what we talked about. Okay, then we had our fun little usability test. And what was kind of the main takeaway from doing this usability test, on paper?
Cheap. It's cheap.
It's cheap. Okay. What else?
You can avoid opinion wars. Because focusing on the high level.
Sure. But what did we learn by doing the usability test?
You learn the mindset of the person as they go through it.
Right.
You can listen to all their thoughts.
Yep. So you get some rich feedback just from paper, right? You don't have to necessarily build an entire prototype for someone to say, yay or nay to your product. Okay, and then we talked a little bit about paper prototyping, which led into usability testing as well as interactions. Okay, so before we get into today's topic, a couple announcements. The first is, I know there was some confusion around Lab 2, so you will have to do a presentation in the lab itself, which you'll get graded on, so I'll do 50% of the grade coming from that. And then the second is you'll have to do a write-up. Now, this write-up can be, it doesn't have to be in LaTeX or anything like that, but if you're going to do a PowerPoint presentation or a keynote presentation, whatever tool you want to use is fine. You can hand that in as your write-up as long as it covers all the points listed in the assignment. Or you can do two separate things where you just have a presentation and then you submit the write-up, but they're both due during lab time. Okay, is that clear to everybody? Because I know there's some confusion. Okay, yes.
That's next week.
Next week, yeah, during your lab session, yes. Okay, are there any other questions on Lab 2 before we get started with class? Okay, so everyone's done their customer interviews, they're feeling pretty confident, getting feedback. Okay. All right, so once again, just to review, public service announcement that we are holding October 23rd, we will be holding a review session. I will post some times. I know I haven't done that yet, but I will. Okay, so this week we're going to dive, even further into customer development. I know it seems like, wow, we spent a number of time. What is there left to cover in terms of customers, right? What we've talked about actually has been more customer development. We've done our market research. We've pinpointed segments. Now we're going to talk about customer creation, right? How do you actually create customers for the product that you are going to be putting out there? And we're going to talk about this idea of a Concierge MVP. How many of you have heard of a Concierge MVP? Okay, so a handful of you. We're going to dig into what this is exactly, and then finally we're going to do, if we have time, a little exercise in your groups where you're all going to think about what you could potentially offer as a Concierge MVP. Okay? So, think about it as we are doing the lecture. So, we've shown this slide a number of times now. We started with the customer discovery phase about 2 weeks ago, and then last week we talked a lot about validation, right? What does it mean to validate your customers? Well, it means to have customer interviews, maybe some, send up some questionnaires, but you really want to understand if there is a problem for you to solve. And then only once you get past that stage can you move into this third phase of customer creation, which is where we're at today. So, like I said, we've conducted interviews, we've tested across various segments, we might have even done some usability tests, right? Customer creation, all of this stuff can happen before customer creation. And then we've also done some of the marketing, right? We've positioned our product so that people will understand whether we're entering a new market or whether we're entering an existing one, or maybe we're taking a market and we're resegmenting it, right? We're creating our unique position that we're going to start from. However, after doing all this, there may be some factors that will affect our growth, right? We might think, oh, well, there's so many students out there who would want a service like what we're offering, or, whoever the user segment is, only to discover that there's a number of factors that are actually going to hinder our growth. And these factors don't necessarily mean infrastructure, okay? So that's not what I'm referring to. A lot of times it's something else. A lot of it is building up awareness in the market or building up an awareness compared to a competitor. So we'll talk about how you can do that. And that's really what customer creation is. You are, in essence, creating customers for yourself with your product, but you're going to have to go through some steps in order to do that, right? In order to convince people that they need a solution like yours. Because at the stage that they're at, they might think of a competitor, they might not know about yours, and they might be debating between the two. So, customer creation is a series of some marketing activities. And really, though, it's to give customers an understanding about your product and, like I said before, a desire for them to actually want to purchase this product, right? It's not enough for them to just say, oh, yeah, I think this is really cool. Good job, guys, right? Hey, are you going to, hand over some cash because you actually, think that this is a value to you? Now, this oftentimes is in direct opposition with this mentality of get big fast, right? This is kind of the typical I think, startup scenario where people are like, well, we'll just go raise a bunch of money and, hopefully, and if you're so fortunate to do that, and then, we'll use that money to then go out and tell people about our product, and that's how we will, essentially become a big company really quickly. However, this approach isn't always a good one for a number of reasons, and I'll give you guys a couple case studies to pinpoint that. But the number one reason that this isn't a good strategy is because you're actually not taking the time to really think through how does the customer want to buy from you, or do they even want to buy from you, right? So before you even do this step of potentially going out and raising capital or trying to get big fast, you're going to want to have at least a handful or more customers that have actually paid you for their product, right? Gone beyond a level of just, I'm interested. And if you don't do this, then this is where a lot of the problems happen. You end up taking too much money because you think you need to build out more systems, or you need to do more marketing plans, or you need to hire more people, right? So you start to over-optimize just because you have some money, but it's not necessary. You haven't figured out what the basic problem is, once again, that you're solving, that people are going to be willing to pay for. So, we're going to talk a little bit about demand creation, versus early adopter launch, because that's the phase that we're in now. We're launching our product for an early adopter. This isn't for the mainstream. And this actually is a little bit different from what we've talked about in the past when we talked about market share, right? We did all of those Mecco graphs, and we talked about how much market share do our competitors have. That's still important. But we're in such an early phase right now that we can't anticipate that we're going to be able to take market share away, or at least a significant amount, in the first year from a potential competitor. Now, I know there are some companies that have proven, this kind of thinking wrong, and they have been successful at taking market share, but they're few and far between. So I'm talking about the general case here. So in general, what you want to be thinking about is how much market adoption can we get? Okay, and I'll explain to you how you can think about adoption in a minute. The second is when we're talking about demand creation, a lot of it is more about education, right? It's a lot about telling people, what the benefits are of your product and how they can go about purchasing from you and why this is such a superior product than, possibly the competitor. Not always wanting to use that kind of approach, but at least giving them a sense of why it's specifically for them. Now, this is also not the time to think about customer acquisition programs, right? So I know we're gonna talk a little bit about how do we do Google Analytics and all of that, but this isn't the time to say, oh, I'm going to spend a ton of money trying to acquire users through Google AdWords or something else, right? Because you actually don't really know how much a customer costs, right? You might have some ideas or you might be headed in a certain direction, but you're really not sure. So it's not the time to invest in, something that more traditional or larger companies would be doing, right? So don't take what you see, big companies doing and think that you can just kind of scale down and use that for your stage, right? Unfortunately, a lot of bigger companies have a lot of branding, many years, a lot of credibility behind them that a smaller company doesn't. So much of what you're doing is purely educational more than anything else, despite what kind of products you're selling. Now, the final is, finding these early evangelists. This is a term that Steve Blank uses in his book. But what he's talking about is finding the product, or give those early evangelists the product so that they know how to spread the word, right? They're already familiar. They're probably doing this for a number of other products. So for them, they're going to find it and they're going to spread the word, but you've got to make it so that they can actually find it. Okay, so we'll talk about how to do that. So once again, this is not about having a formal marketing department, running a bunch of campaigns, setting up a budget, thinking, oh, we'll spend $10,000 and we'll get, 1 million users. It's often not that kind of mathematics, right? You're not at that stage yet. You're still very, very early on. The other is you've got to be thinking about what are the creation events, right? Where can you go to find these people? What is it that you want to do so they house like informational sessions, and those sorts of things, rather than just we'll run multiple campaigns, right? So oftentimes it is we're going to do one email blast and hopefully we get some people, and then maybe we'll try something else. Maybe we'll go out into the field and find people. So figuring out which events actually starts to make sense so that you can then create a repeatable process, but you're not at that stage yet. And then the third, which is really important to understand, is when you're thinking about your marketing program in demand creation, is it really depends on the market. Okay? So some markets can be really receptive to Google AdWords or running campaigns, right? If I'm going to sell an educational program about how to do web development, of course it makes sense for me to put it on Google, right? But if I'm going to sell something else, right, a point of sale system to a small mom and pop shop, doesn't really make sense. They might not be looking there. They might be looking in other avenues. So once again, this is why those customer interviews that we talked about are so critical, and they still fit in here when we're thinking about how do we create more and more customers. Okay, and then we're going to talk about your actual product launch, right? So there is going to be a phase where you launch the product, it's in the public, people can get access to it. And then the final is a lot of times this customer creation depends on more factors than just your initial marketing campaign. So we'll give you some scrappy marketing tactics in this course, later on, but you really have to think about how do we do our advertising? Do we do some sort of public relations? Do we attend trade shows, right? Once again, these are all the things that you have to do to generate some level of customers. Okay, so the reason I bring up this document, or this table, is because we did our market research for a reason. Okay, we went out to see how much market share companies had, because we're going to use it as a sort of yardstick for us to get a sense of how much market adoption, not market share, but market adoption we can get, and how expensive it might be, right? And this is sort of, once again, your classic, if any of you have done Google AdWords, if there's a lot of competition, you know that you're going to have to pay more money for every single click, right? So similarly here, if you're operating against a competitor that's a monopoly, meaning they have more than 75% market share, then your cost of entering into that market, just entering, not even acquiring a customer yet, but just entering and launching your product, in order to get some level of awareness, is going to be 3 times a lot of times what they're paying. Okay? Because they've got the benefit of, we've been in the market for a long time, we don't have to spend as much. So if they're spending $100 to acquire a customer, you're probably going to spend about $300 to acquire that same kind of customer. Now, same thing if it's a duopoly, and by that I mean, there's 2 big guys. So imagine you're trying to put out a tablet, and there's Microsoft, and there's Apple. Well, once again, you're going to have to pay 3 times as much. And then it kind of breaks down after that. So the easiest, obviously, is it's an open market. There's a lot of fragmentation. Nobody has more than 26% market share. And a lot of times people have less, in which case you're going to be spending about 1.7 times whatever your competitor is spending. Does this make sense? So, when you're thinking about customer creation, there's 4 things that you need to do. The first is you have to think about year 1 objectives. Because too often people think, oh, this is like a 1 month or a 2 month or a quarter process, and it's really a year-long process. It's really more of a 10-year process, but initially it's going to be a year 1 set of objectives. So then you want to think about how are you not only going to position, we've talked a lot about positioning, right? But we're not only going to position the company, but we're also going to position the products. And a lot of times they're one and the same, right? It might be that you are talking about having a simple product, but your company is also, very simple people or, whatnot. So think about how you can position both of them. And of course, you're going to go through and you're going to launch your company and your product, right? So this is why we talked about corporate structure, why you need to have that, legal liability in place, or the limited liability in place. And then once again, we're going to talk about demand creation. So this also needs to be included in your year 1 objectives. What else are you going to do? Are you going to use advertising? Are you going to have PR? Do you have the capital to go to a trade show? So you have to think about these things in your year 1 objectives. So, why do you think we asked this question of what kind of company are we? Why is this even important?
Because depending on whether you're a high-growth startup or a consulting firm or just a business, mom-and-pop shop, the particular things that you should be doing very much differ.
Okay. So give me an example.
So, from personal experience, if you're working with the government, usually you're doing consulting work.
Okay.
So the strategy will be to go wine and dine people and have like a 2-year sales cycle and talk to as many people as possible and reach out to as many connections. However, if you're a high-growth startup, say you're Instagram,
okay,
then you go out and wildly try to acquire new customers from whatever channels you can.
Okay. Well, that tells me more of like what kind of company you've become. I want to know what kind of company are you? I know this is kind of tricky. You're like, what do you mean by that?
You want to know, like, I don't know if this is what you're asking, but you want to know, like, what company you are in terms of, like, the market type of the company?
Partially, yes, that's a good point. Yep, that's a good start. What kind of market are you in? Sure.
Like, how much effort is required to take on new customers? Because, like, if you're, like, two
Has
people...
nothing to do with customers.
So is this a psychology question of
Yes.
the founder? Okay. So if you want to be a high-growth company, then you will execute very differently. I don't know.
Possibly. Okay, let's see. It's a little bit more than that. These are 3 points, but really, this doesn't answer that question. What I'm getting at when I ask this question of what kind of company are we, it's asking the question of, what does that we value here, right? It doesn't matter if you're a high growth or you're a mom and pop shop, right? But what is it that we value? Do we value our customers? Because then it doesn't matter whether you're, a well-funded startup or you're bootstrapping your business, right? You kind of have this value in place. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because this also determines the position of your company, okay? So it's a little bit of a, different way of thinking, but the reason I bring it up is sometimes people say, well, this is the kind of company we are today where, the first 5 years we're going to bootstrap and we're going to get our customers and we're going to value people paying us on time. And then maybe in like 10 years, we're going to become a really big corporation and we're going to maybe offer some free products or some low-end products, right? So we might change the way that we think a little bit, but for today, this is the kind of company we are. These are the things that we value. Okay, and part of this messaging also then translates to someone else, and meaning the customer. So a lot of times the customer will see this as, oh, they're a small startup, or they're maybe a medium-sized company, and maybe I want to do business with those kind of folks because they have certain values. Now I need to dig into what those values are versus I'm going to go to McDonald's because I know, what kind of Big Mac I'm going to get, right? So think of it, Five Guys versus McDonald's, right? Which would you prefer? What kind of company are they, right? Same product, really, but a little bit different in terms of the way that they're structured, their values, and then, of course, the products speak back to those values, right? I know it's a little bit funny, but this also helps with your positioning. Now, the other reason I bring it up is because this is also going to determine how customers are going to interact with your company. Not just, that they're going to buy your product or they're going to say good things or bad things about you, but they're going to think about how do the customers buy, right? Do they line up at the door, waiting in line, hoping that they'll get the next iPhone, or are they searching online, or are they hearing it from friends and family, right? It's important to think about that even in the early stages of your company. And then we've talked about this sort of ad nauseum, what are their needs, what are potential places that you can find them, trade shows, do they go to any events, right? Once again, how are they interacting with you? And this doesn't always have to be about sales, okay? That's the other thing to keep in mind is too often, people immediately jump into the sales bucket thinking that's how we have to interact with customers. But a lot of times it's that people need to interact with you possibly for months, sometimes even years, before they're ready to buy. Which means, of course, that you're going to have to do some level of education, you're going to have to do some level of company positioning, and you're going to have to do it consistently over time so that they then feel comfortable, purchasing from you. Or sometimes they're not even ready to purchase, right? They might not have the capital or the budget, or they might not have the needs yet, and then they're slowly starting to grow, and then they need a solution like yours. So sometimes you have to think and anticipate those needs as well. Now, the other thing that you want to do, right, in this customer creation phase, and this is really key, is describe life to a customer without your product, right? So really make them understand what it is that they're going to be missing out on, right? What's the cost of inaction? Is it continuing to, feel the pain of not getting an internship? Or, is it something else, right? Just bringing up some examples from y'all. Now, the other thing, which we won't really get into in this class, but it's probably a good exercise, especially since you'll be applying for the Duke Startup Challenge, is setting a budget. Okay, setting a budget for customer creation. How much do you think it's going to take to go out and do some of these campaigns, right? If you know how much it costs to attend a trade show, then that should be some, one line item there, $5,000 to go to a trade show. Or if it's, hey, we need to go to 10 college campuses to recruit students for our program, well, hey, what's the cost of travel, right? So you've got to make sure you've got all of those line items in there. Or, hey, we need to hire a marketing person. Okay, so think about the budget for the first year. Now, once again, taking this out of the book, it's a little bit crazy, but I'll sort of boil it down to what I'm getting at here, which is that if you're operating in an existing market, right, there are certain things that you're going to have to do. So you're going to have to start by really thinking about your company, how you can differentiate yourselves, and how you can get credibility. And the reason is because in an existing market, there's a lot of competition, right? Then second is if you're in a new market, well then you've got to give people this illusion of, what's the vision for your innovation? Why is this newfangled device really going to revolutionize the way that you live your life? And then, finally, if you're at the low end, right, you might think about what particular needs you can offer to a segment, and how you're innovating for that particular group. So I'm not going to get into the rest here, but you get the idea of how you then have to go through, think about your product positioning, even think about how you're going to launch your company, and what the demand creation activities are going to be, right? Sometimes a lot of it is education, sometimes it's more pure sales, right? Okay, so let me ask you guys a question. Do you think that the first mover has the advantage? Why not? Okay, sometimes. Why do you say sometimes?
It depends what type of product you're selling.
Okay, give me an example.
So it depends how quickly you start acquiring customers too. If
Now,
you're-
there's a lot of depends. So, does the first mover have the advantage or not?
It depends.
In general, do you think they have it? Okay, so if they don't have the advantage, let's assume that they don't have the advantage. Why wouldn't they have the advantage?
They could be too early.
Good, they could be too early. That's a really good point, Matt.
Well, like if you're the first mover, you're paying like so much money for education.
Yeah.
And then like the next person could like take advantage of, you know, what they did wrong, what they did right, and not have to educate the market.
Totally. Yep. The second guy could come in there and leverage a lot of your, great efforts at laying down all those wonderful highways, and then say, oh, look, I've got the second car, and I don't have to deal with all the government bureaucracy of building roads and all this stuff, right? But hey, I can focus on something else. I can focus on being innovative. Yeah, that.
I was going to say, like,
Same
learn
thing?
from their mistakes.
Yeah, learn from their mistakes.
I guess on the other side, if you do acquire quickly, then you have people who don't want to switch from there.
Well, that's a good point. That is a good point. You do have some level of loyalty, right? But the key is that you have a way to keep a hold on that loyalty, okay? Because it's not 100%, right? People can always leave. People can always go buy another product, or they can try another product, right? So there's nothing that's like beholden to them necessarily. So yeah, it does require them to put in a little bit more effort, or for you to put in a little more effort to get that customer. So maybe you can't do it in year 1 or 2, but when you've got a bigger budget or you build something that helps them transition, then it's possible. Okay, so here's the first case study. This is, Ford versus GM versus Toyota. So, clearly Ford was the first to the market, and in 1921 sold over 900,000 Model Ts. And they had 60% market share, which was great, right? And compared to GM, that only had 61,000 Chevys and 6% market share. So, you would think, well, Ford's just like way ahead of the game, right? They should just be able to continue bulldozing over Chevy. Well then, a 10-year period went by, and Ford actually didn't think about loyalty. Instead, it focused on cost reductions, right? And that became its whole focus. So in the meantime, GM was like, hey, let's diversify, let's build out some, more product line. And remember, in one of the previous lectures, I said, if your competitor has a very diverse product line, it makes it really hard for you to compete with them, right? So here we see it in action, where GM's got a very, very, large product line that different people can come and purchase from them. So then the inevitable happened in 1931. GM had 31% market share and Ford had 28%. And ever since then, GM has always led a little bit more. Now, I don't know if any of this has to do with getting bailouts and stuff, so don't trust me on that. But, in general, this is why. And then, of course, while Ford and GM are duking it out, this new company comes along, Toyota, in 1964. And then what happens? Well, we know what happens, right? Today, they are the most dominant player in the market because they're able to do everything. They're able to keep costs low, give a quality product, keep loyalty, right? So sometimes that first mover doesn't have the advantage, and even though they might have, done a great job of overcoming people's inhibitions, which is what Ford did, right? They were sort of the forefront of getting people to even start using cars. They lost out in the long run. Okay, so it's not enough to be the first person in the market, right? You really got to think about the type of market that you're in. If you're in a new market, then sure, you're going to be able to have that first mover advantage. But as your market starts to get less and less new, you have to think about resegmenting and how do you really capture the loyalty of customers. So, in the first year, we're always thinking about customer creation, okay? So too often people will think about other things. And what I want to point out is this should be your ultimate goal. It's always about customer creation. It's always about, is this a product and a company that can scale, not just, can we go out and raise capital? Can we do a fun marketing campaign? Can we satisfy our need to build whatever? That's not the point. The point of the first year is it, or how can we create customers? So when we're thinking about how we can create customers, it comes back to that, remember I said the market, the total market, and then the TAM versus the SAM? So in this case, when we're talking about SAM, serviceable market, we're going to subtract any customer who's bought a competitor solution. Okay? Because once again, this becomes now our target market that we can go after, because we're not going to be able to switch them away. However, we have to keep in mind that there may be some customers that say they wanted a whole product. Okay? And when they say they want a whole product, what they're referring to is service, support, and infrastructure. And a lot of times, you may not have this built out, right? You might not even have a customer support team. It might just be like you and your buddy building this, right? And so you're going to have to service all the orders. You're going to have to listen to their complaints. You're going to have to take money from them. You might have to replace things if you are building a physical product. So, sometimes people will be a little bit against buying from you if you don't have those things in place, or you figure out how to fake it, right, and do a good job of satisfying them so that they feel like you have a whole product, even if you don't. Okay, so I know we talked about this a little bit when we talked about how it's important to think about the whole experience, but now that once again we're digging into building the product, you've got to also think about these other things, right? It's not enough to just have a great device or a great product that you're selling if the customer support team sucks, or if you can't get a replacement part for it, or if your hard drive crashes and in the middle of the weekend and you've got to go figure out a way to get a new machine. Not that that happened or anything this weekend. I did have to wait in a very long line behind a bunch of iPhone users or iPhone purchasers. So the other thing we have to think about is, given our pricing, and we haven't gotten into pricing yet, so this is just a teaser, right? We might just be playing around with pricing right now. But given our pricing, what we anticipate our pricing to be, how many customers do we think can afford our product in year one? Okay, and that's also referring to this stripped down product, not the whole version, maybe not what we anticipate the product becoming in 5 years, but just the simple prototype. How many people could afford this? Okay, and this is why one of the questions that we have in our in our qualification questionnaire is, do they have a budget? Okay, so here's how we have to think about it. Has anybody seen a funnel like this before? Yes? Yes? Did you say yes? Okay. No, you haven't. Okay. So basically what we're aiming for here is revenue number for year one, right? This could be something like 3 people can pay rent. That's how much money we have to make, right? Figure out what your yardstick is. It could be something bigger. It could be like, hey, we want to make $1 million. Okay, great. So then we've got to take a step back and figure out how many people need to pay full price in order for us to get this revenue. But it's even a step further than that. How many number of qualified prospects does it take to close, one person? Meaning, of the group of people that we talk to that have filled out our qualification questionnaire and we think they're going to purchase from us, how many does that take just to get one, right? What's the ratio? And then a step even higher level than that is how many raw leads, like how many people do we have to attract, right? Whether that's traffic to our site or people that we just talk to on a daily basis or influencers or experts, right? What's the top level number look like of people that need to know about our company before we can even do one sale and then, of course, multiply that. Does this make sense? Okay. So a lot of times people don't think about it this way, right? They just think, oh, well, if we get 20 customers at, $10,000, well, then we've got, $200K. Well, great, but how much time and energy and leads is it going to take you to get those 20 customers, or even 5? Right? And I think as you all go through your interviews and things like that in these labs, you'll start to get a sense. Okay? And this is why a lot of times, as painful as it is to get rejections from people, you kind of just have to chalk it up to, okay, raw lead, and then keep going. Okay? Sometimes it takes 100, sometimes it takes 200. When I was doing cold calls about 2 summers ago, it would take me about 200 calls before I would get through to somebody. And then, of course, 50% ratio of closing them after that point, right? So then, it kind of became this interesting statistic for me. But it would also take me about 3 hours to get through 200 calls. And not all of them are picking up the phone.
How did the conversation go?
Well, I had scripts and stuff like that. So a lot of times we'd have multiple stages where initially I'd have like maybe my support person just call up and say, like, ask them 2 questions. The qualification questionnaire. Hey, are you on a competitor solution? Okay, great. We're not going to bother talking to you anymore. Or, oh, you're not? Okay, are you in the market for something? Well, great. Well, if you're interested, we can give you a call back and give you some information. Okay, so there is a level of that kind of process. But yeah, you have to have everything kind of scripted out. And yeah, sometimes people can be really rude. Sometimes people can be like, oh, this is so amazing. I wish this was like 5 years ago, right? So you always hope for those people. And that kind of keeps you going.
Some people want it for free.
Yeah, well then. So, the other thing you have to think about is where would the most qualified leads come from? Okay, so sometimes, like I said, cold calling might not be the best, right? Maybe you're able to attract more folks by going to a trade show because they're actively in a mindset of learning or wanting to buy, right? So you've got to figure out how can you get as close to the point where they're making a purchasing decision, right? And so where do those folks hang out and how are those people qualified? So, not that we're going to dig into all of this, I just wanted to give you this example. Once again, this is when you do an external audit, okay? And really what this is talking about here is it's identifying whether or not people know about you as a company. And not only do people know about you as a company, but do they understand what it is that you do, what your products are, how you fare in comparison to the competitor. Do they think that you're actually a good company? And would they want to purchase from you versus the competition? And do they actually know how to purchase from you? And then digging in a little bit to the future, right? What are some trends that they think that you should be following to satisfy their needs? So this is oftentimes what you conduct at the end of year 1, not at the beginning, right? Because no one's going to know about you. But after you've done all of your efforts, then you're going to put this out there to both your prospects as well as your existing customers. So you don't have to think of this as like, oh, we shouldn't be sending this out to people who didn't want our product. Of course you should, right? Because it gives you a sense of why you couldn't close that sale. Okay? So, you can dig into it when you get the slides, but I just wanted to give you a sense. So, in this, in the customer validation phase, though, you should have understood the needs of the customer, and of course, you should also know not only whether or not they're willing to buy, but who influences the market, right? And we talked about this way back in lecture 1 and 2 about contacting influencers and experts, right? And these people are called messengers. Okay, so these messengers are folks that are going to deliver the message of what our company is, what products we have to offer to the masses, right? Because there's only so many folks that we can all call or deal with. So, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to reach a few of these people, right? We're going to have to start early on establishing some relationships even before we get into product creation phase so that they know that we are heavily interested in pursuing this idea or the solution. So we're going to have to reach out to people that are experts, evangelists, and connectors. So when we talk about experts, right, these are people that really know the industry overall, and they even know all the products in the market and in great detail, oftentimes. One of the experts that we reached out to for Mint were some people that were very much into personal finance, right, so that they would give the most unbiased view of our product compared to others, right? And that's why people go to them, because they think that they're going to give an unbiased view, and they have to uphold that. But the other key also is that these consumers are relying on their opinions because they've done this deep dive. Now, they're not going to proselytize your product, so you can't say, how much is it to say that my product is amazing, right? And oftentimes they are also going to charge you for advice or for any kind of consulting. But still good to start attacking these people early on. Compare them to the evangelists, right? The evangelists, they don't care about anything. They're totally fine selling your product and praising you because they are your cheerleaders and your unpaid salespeople. In fact, they're the ones that are paying you. They're usually your paying customers. The key, though, is to mention to them and to kind of keep on them that you are looking for more folks and that they are sort of spreading the word about you. So creating a little bit of a referral engine. I need to put that third point up there. Okay. So then finally we talk about connectors, right? These are people who may be bloggers or writers. And the reason that they're really important is because, kind of like the experts, they're thought leaders. And they're able to kind of connect multiple markets together or multiple segments together. And so a lot of times they're thinking, very high level, and they're talking about more of your company rather than just like the particular product that you're offering. But to attract them, you sometimes need to have a relationship with them because once again, it's sort of like their reputation is on the line. So the other thing is when you're delivering a message, whether it's to an expert, whether it's to a connector or to an evangelist, right? It needs to be memorable and sticky. How many of you have read this book, Made to Stick? Okay, one. So I'd encourage you to read it. It's a pretty quick read, and obviously it's not required. But the reason that this is important is because you want people to leave with an impression, right? At least something where they're like, okay, I understood, not everything, but I get what the company's trying to do, and I could easily tell someone else about it, right? So they might not know the mechanics behind your product, but they at least understand your vision and your mission. So it's up to you, of course, to figure out how simple you can make it, right? And this is why there's so many companies that do like jingles and spend a lot of time finding the right way to name their company because it's all part of branding, right? It's all part of that memorability. Okay. So another checklist, right? When you're going after some of these media folks, right? You want to start by obviously looking through your customer interviews and what people said, right? What did the early evangelists tell you were the media outlets that they listened to, watch, or read? And, do they also attract mainstream customers? Because, hey, it's not that you can't attract mainstream folks, but you just have to be a little bit cautious on whether or not you're ready for them. And then, of course, what media do they then use, or what do the influencers use in terms of media? Or what kind of media map are they using? Like, are they using multiple sources in order to get information? And then final, right, and this oftentimes takes testing. So you can't just, start from point one and assume that you know what's going to be the best return on your investment. You're going to have to test out a few channels. Okay? So, you're going to have some trouble getting traction. Everybody does. Don't feel bad. There really, isn't one company that just took off immediately. They will say that they did, and that's once again because they're trying to position themselves and try to portray themselves really well in the media, but a lot of times people do struggle with getting traction. So a lot of times, you'll hear things like, well, our app has been downloaded 10,000 times, or we've got 1 million users, or we were featured on TechCrunch, right? So when you read stuff like this, you're thinking, wow, they must be doing really well. Like, kudos to them. And then, you wonder if they're still doing well after some time, right? So some time passes, and then, they start to hear crickets, and like, I really heard about that XYZ company that was like all over the media a year ago. They raised all this money, they IPO'd in like 4 years. It was like incredible, right? And of course, the company's like, oh, we're still building features, we're still going, or maybe they're still a startup, right? Maybe they're really a young company. It's not necessarily a big company, but they're still building features. And then, of course, there's this inevitable flatline that happens, right? And it's like, wow, I didn't see that coming. Like, either the founders feel that way or the public feels that way. So what happened? What do you think happened? I mean, they had so many downloads, and they were on TechCrunch, and they had millions of users.
Potentially, like we talked about, someone took their general concept or idea and did it better.
Possibly, but that's not usually the case.
No user engagement.
Okay, that's close. Yep.
They don't use the feedback. They get to innovate and make the experience better.
Sure. Yeah, you're both right. So essentially what they did is they didn't really validate their early adopters or their value proposition, right? Just because somebody gets 10,000 downloads or 1 million users or is featured in TechCrunch doesn't mean that their customers love them or that their customers are paying, being the operative word, for their products. Okay? So the only way to know that is, of course, that they have early adopters that are paying and have bought into their value proposition. So once again, I've talked about this concept a little bit before, but MVP, minimum viable product, think of it like your prototype. So the reason too often that this fails isn't because people aren't capable of building or that they haven't done some amount of work, but it's really that they didn't really know their early adopter, right? They thought that they knew their early adopter, but they really didn't go through this course. And the second is that they also might not have had a simple enough of a value proposition, right? They might have something that's really complicated for their market to understand or their user segments to understand. And so even after downloading or signing up for them, they might not have stuck around. They might not have that user engagement that Tito mentioned. Or, like Walter mentioned, they might not have taken feedback that their customers gave them and iterated on it, right? They might have actually had a segment that was interested or early adopters, but they didn't keep the momentum going. And so, you've seen this before. Once again, they kind of fall into this hole of they don't really have early adopters, and they're certainly not going to be able to get mainstream. So, when I say resist the urge to build, this doesn't mean, don't build your prototype, but too often what happens is this is the time that people take when they aren't seeing user engagement or they're not seeing feedback from customers or people paying for their product as, oh, we need to go out and build more things, right? That's not what we should be doing here, right? We should actually have to take a step back. So, a lot of times people will then say, I don't want to get too involved in building something yet. How can I even validate my early adopters? How can I maybe, do some sales, get some feedback? Well, that's why this concept of a concierge MVP can be really valuable. And I know a number of you are building things that may eventually become tech products, but you're also kind of starting in a place where you might be able to offer what you're doing as a service. Okay? So, who in here says they knew what a concierge MVP is? Okay, so what's a concierge MVP there?
It's like where you don't automate everything and like the human does some of the stuff in the background.
Sure, that's a good way to put it. So it's really that it's an experience. It's not a full product. Okay? You're giving your customers an experience. They don't know any better. They think, oh, I'm getting this service and I'm totally happy, and it seems like all these young kids have their act together, but behind the scenes, right, you're doing all of the hard work. Okay, you're not automating anything yet because you maybe are just validating that people are going to sign up for your service and pay you for it. Right? So the key things to keep in mind as you are building this concierge MVP are exactly the same that we've talked about all along. Right? Do your customers recognize that they have a problem and that you have a solution and that they're willing to buy the solution from you and that you can build the solution, but you can start by building a very, very simple version. And sometimes you don't even build anything. Okay? Sometimes you just build a landing page. But the key is that your concierge MVP is going to validate your value proposition. And it's also going to validate who your early adopters are. So here's one example. This company is called Food on the Table. And what they essentially wanted to do long term was to have a website where people could go and place orders of what food they wanted delivered to them on a website. But the two founders were like, that's really complicated, let's not go there yet, let's take a step back. And so what they actually did is they went to their local supermarket, harassed a bunch of customers, or people, and then one person actually said, sure, this seems like a service that I could use. And what's interesting about that first customer was that she was a busy mom. And for her, she wanted to spend more time with her family. She didn't want to run to the grocery store every weekend and spend an hour or two when she could instead be spending that with her family. And so once they identified her as the early adopter or the first customer, then they just said, I wonder how long she will continue being our customer and if our service is good enough. And of course, every time they dropped off for groceries, they would collect $9.95. So this was the other key thing that they were testing. Will somebody pay for this service? Now, as they were doing this concierge MVP, obviously they're thinking, well, I have to pick up groceries from the store. Oh, I've got to get the order list. Oh, I have to deliver the groceries. I've got to figure out a way to automate all of this, right? But initially, they hadn't come up with a solution to do all of that just yet. Okay, so they're doing it manually, like Harris said, human beings performing this action. Okay? How many of you knew that these folks started off as a concierge MVP? Dropbox. Everyone knows Dropbox, right? File syncing, okay. So, what's interesting about Dropbox is they actually built a prototype. And they went to a bunch of people and they said, it's going to seamlessly sync all your files. And guess what happened?
Everybody was like, what?
Exactly, they were like, we don't believe you. Because there have been too many crappy products in the market that don't do this well that we think you're just, the 100th crappy product. And so they're like, no, we really, we really work. And it wasn't until that they actually put up a video that showed how they worked that people actually, bought into them. So they kind of had to take a little bit of a step back. It wasn't the prototype that was selling, it was the marketing video, right? So this is another concept of a Concierge MVP. It's taking a very stripped down prototype and then, of course, marketing that. So when you're doing a Concierge MVP, right, the one thing you have to be thinking in the back of your mind is this isn't the time to focus on growth, right? So this isn't how can I get 1,000 or 1,000,000 customers, right? This comes back to how can I get that first customer and what else am I trying to validate in terms of value proposition. So it's a little bit of a different kind of mindset that you need to be thinking about. The other thing is that you, once again, have to think about what is the customer going to care about in terms of you solving their problems or addressing their needs, right? So similar to what we've always talked about before, but really honing in on it when you're doing the Concierge MVP, because you're not going to have a product to offer them, right? You're really giving them the experience. So then you've got to think about, once again, how can we still service them without having anything physical, or virtual built. And then, once again, we still have to ask this question, who are our customers, right? It's not enough to think we're building something very different. It still matters who our customers are. There might be some people who are like, oh, I don't want a service, I want a product, right? I don't want to interact with human beings, I just want something push button. So there might even be people who don't want this, right? They want to wait for your first prototype to come out. But the key is that, it's not just a product, it's about the entire experience. And you have to think about how you're going to craft that experience. So let's assume for some reason you put a product out there, you thought you knew who your early adopters were, but for whatever reason you sort of flatlined, right? Can you bounce back? You think you can bounce back from this? Oh, that's it. It's over. Dead in the water. Dead on arrival.
I guess just because you have a list of customers that contact information, everything like that, you can always reach out to them.
Sure, you could try to get them again, right? You can say like, hey, we're trying something new.
Yeah.
What do you think they're going to say?
Well, they might remember the positive emotion that they had with it.
But what if they didn't like your product? What if they hated your product? They were like, this is crap. I'm never going to deal with that Android kid again.
James can join us.
Well, before you leave to another country and start your startup or do the witness protection program, right? Let's take a little bit of a step back. So this actually happened to me. So with BusyBee, I made this big hoopla about we're going to be a small business tool, and we got about 100 people to sign up, 100 emails. And the day that we launched was like in August of 2010. All these 100 people showed up, and they tried the product out. And then a couple weeks went by, and I kept looking at the logs, and nobody came back. And I was like, oh, well, that's great. And so then I got a little bit nervous. I was like, nobody's coming back. So I basically picked up the phone and called as many people as I could that I knew their phone numbers. And what was really clear from each of the conversations were two things. The first was there are so many types of small businesses. So this is something that I didn't really take the time to think about in my 100 email signups. So we were getting, our messaging was too broad, right? There were people who were chiropractors and people that were building small products or consulting firms or building contractors. And we had attracted all of these people, and for them, they were like, oh, it doesn't have what I need, and that's why I left. And so what was clear is we didn't know who our not only early adopter was, we didn't even know what kind of persona we were dealing with. So what we actually ended up doing was scrapping that entire 100-person email list, right? It was a learning experience. And then we decided that we really had to get focused on picking one particular segment, which were the yoga studios, and on top of that, it was going after those that are independent, not the franchises, okay? So sometimes you have to scrap some of the work, but we still kept the name, we still kept a lot of the infrastructure, and we slowly started to change the product. So yes, you can bounce back, but you've got to think about what are some elements that you might have to change, and what can you keep. So it's not that you have to scrap everything away. I think too often people think like, well, let's just call it a day, right? Let's all go home. But sometimes there are pieces that are salvageable, and it's up to you to figure out what those can be. And then of course, yeah.
What happens if you keep following the customer and just get yourself into a very, very small niche market?
Are they paying you?
Yeah.
Are they paying you enough to keep the lights on?
Yeah. But do you want to continue doing it? Like, at what point in time would you say that the market is too small for you?
Well, that's something that you have to think about, right? So you have to think about, am I going to continue to be in this niche market where, maybe I'm only making 50 or 100K a year, or maybe a little bit more than that, and is that enough, or is there, another segment that's very close to the one I'm operating in right now with a similar set of needs that I could possibly attract? So typically when people move out of niche markets, they move into ones like the next one that's exactly like the first one, right? Just with like a different, face on it.
So what would be an example for Busy Bee?
So when we started, yoga was our first market, and then we started to attract dance studios and Pilates and like other folks that were teaching classes, like people who were teaching music lessons. But we kind of decided we didn't want to actually put too much emphasis on them just yet. So a lot of our branding, a lot of our messaging is still focused on studio owners, but we just say, hey, we're willing to take you, because we think that that market is big enough right now that we want to tailor our message to that, and then we'll expand beyond it. So yeah, and then the other thing is we'd have to reskin it, right? So we can't have like a bunch of little icons doing yoga postures. We'd have to have them doing something else.
What were the main variables you were considering when picking which market to go into for the yoga owners?
Oh, why did I choose?
Yeah, what did you look at in the music data, or what about that market made you say, okay, we're going to start here?
So a little bit of the backstory is I didn't trust my gut. So my co-founder actually really didn't like the yoga market, and I always wanted to be in that market just because, going back to some of the lectures we've had before, I had domain expertise, I had a network. I also knew that there was a first mover in there that people didn't like, who was our competitor. I knew that I could re-segment it and go after a particular segment, being the independent studios. So I knew all of this, right? And I just kind of didn't trust my gut. And I kind of let her steer me off course and try to capture a bigger market, try to go horizontal while we were still young and didn't have enough credibility. So it was really more of a judgment call than anything else. Does that make sense? So yeah, let that be a lesson here. Sometimes you have to trust your gut. Okay, so then, actually this is a good question that Carol just brought up, and it perfectly segues with this. Will I grow, right? If I start in a niche market, or if I start really small, will I actually be able to grow? Well, you will be able to grow eventually, and we've got some examples. So before I get into the examples of growth, I want to highlight one more case. So for those of you who might not even be building software products or hardware products, right? If you're building purely web-based businesses, here's an example. So this, once again, is one of my businesses, Femgineer. And it was just a blog. I've been writing for 6 years. I developed quite an audience. And then about 9 months ago, I decided that I was getting really tired of people asking me to teach and, for free advice. And I was like, well, maybe I can monetize this, right? So that's when I thought about teaching an online course, and I put up just one page ad on my blog, so I didn't even go out and do other channels. I just wanted to test one channel. And then I was able to basically do a bunch of pre-sales. So I got everybody to pay about $700 for the first course, and they hadn't even taken the course yet. So it was just syllabus. And then through that, I was like, okay, this is how I'm going to bootstrap the business. And obviously since then we've had a few iterations and we've changed things and we do more marketing, but this started as a Concierge MVP, just an experience. Okay, so for some of you who aren't necessarily building tech products, here's an example. Now, for those of you, who want to know, will you get big, here's an example of a company that did get big, right? But you might not even have known that they actually started off as a Concierge MVP. So they were an e-commerce platform, right? That's what they are today. But initially, the founder, Nick, just went to a bunch of shoe stores in San Francisco, to some brick-and-mortar stores, and said, what have you got in inventory? I'm going to take that, and I'm going to put it online. And then if somebody buys a shoe, then I'll know that people are willing to buy shoes online. right? So that's kind of how we started it, and obviously there were a number of things that had to happen in order to scale the business, but you can see that there were some humble beginnings, and once again, didn't build a whole lot to get started. Okay? Second example, Airbnb. So, this is obviously a marketplace today. It's one of the largest. But when they started off as a Concierge MVP, right? Just a one-page ad during the Democratic National Convention saying, hey, who doesn't have a hotel room and needs a place to sleep? And they literally just put a bunch of air mattresses on the floor and charged people to sleep on the air mattresses, right? So, early adopters were people that were willing to crash with friends and family. And then, over time, they then developed it into this marketplace that we know of it today. But once again, their value proposition was really simple, right? It's just renting a bed or room from another human being, not from a hotel or a bed and breakfast. And this was very easy for people to understand. Okay. So then, you know what? Yeah.
Sorry, just kind of going back to that Airbnb example.
Sure.
So is it almost like they're making, in some ways, it's almost like they're making one segment of their customers the concierge MVPs, and that like the people that are putting their apartments up for sale and stuff are kind of like.
Well, that's like the purest form of concierge.
Right.
Yes, that's not what I'm trying to get at here.
Right. No, yeah. I was just kind of interested that that's like a different kind of take, I guess, on it.
Yeah. I mean, the reason we call it concierge is like if you go right up to a hotel concierge, they do everything for you. They are a full service. Similarly, you're building a full service experience. Okay? So then we ask the question, what about quality, right? People are going to care about quality. They're not going to want to sleep on air mattresses. Like, how can you build a $100 million or $1 billion business, whatever the valuation is, with people sleeping on air mattresses, right? So what do we do?
Beds.
We get some real beds? What else? What else do we probably have to do? Right? What do we do when people care about quality?
Rating system.
Okay.
So like,
But my question more is like, what about the people that are going to not use your product because they care about quality? They're going to look at the Concierge MVP and be like, what the hell?
You just get better customer service by responding to customer satisfaction.
Okay, sometimes.
We keep a curated list of the best places to sleep.
Sometimes.
Show pictures and videos.
So I'm not asking for a solution of how to improve the quality. I'm asking what about quality? Like, does quality even matter?
I mean, I think if they want higher quality, then they're just not your target market.
Good. So they're probably not your early adopters, right? If they're like, I want to stay at a 5-star hotel, no, this is the Airbnb. What part of air don't you understand, right? So they're probably not your target market. So once again, the customers have to care about the problem solving, solving their problem and servicing their needs. So if they're looking for, 500 thread count sheets and a nice bed, it's probably not servicing their needs, so why bother with them, right? That's not to say that you can't improve, like you all suggested, rating system, offering a curated list. That's saying you can't eventually improve the quality, right, to move towards the mainstream market. But still, even in that concierge MVP, you have to offer some level of quality, but it doesn't have to be necessarily, the demands of the customer. Okay, and in general, if design is an issue, meaning if they do have an issue with your product, and if it really hinders your ability to get traction, then it'll come out by doing the test, right? Enough people will say, I don't want to sleep on an airbed, or no one will want to sleep on an airbed, and then you'll be like, okay, clearly this isn't a brilliant idea, right? So you can think of it that way. But my point is, once again, don't prematurely think, oh, this isn't polished, therefore we can't ship it. Okay? And the other is, like I said before, sometimes you have to get comfortable when you're doing things like the Concierge MVP to throw away your work, right? We obviously threw away our email list, we threw away a lot of our code base with BusyBee. So think about the same thing in your case, right? What is it that you might have to throw away? But what if you learn what's maybe some infrastructure that you can use for the next iteration? Because this is an iterative process. Okay, let's see, do we have time? We've got about 10 minutes, which I guess isn't really enough time. But maybe we'll just take about 5 minutes to do this exercise. So what I want you all to do now that you've gotten into your groups is I want you to take the next 5 minutes and come up with what your value proposition is going to be, right? So I gave you some examples here where we talked about Airbnb. The simple value proposition is rent a bed or a room or for a short stay, right? So what's your value proposition that you could use to test out in a Concierge MVP? Okay, so take 5 minutes, and then we'll have a couple people present for 5 minutes, and then we'll end the class.
Hey, read your group over here. There you go. There you go.
Look how he turned away.
Grass is greener.
You literally turned the guy off for a second. Downgrading.
Definitely downgrading.
What's up? So they're trying to, that's what it's about.
They want to.
I appreciate that. No, I remember when you too. For we provide better to make meaningful
So you, well, the thing is, we would have to get to, but it wouldn't matter. So my point is it doesn't matter though. I work 8:30 plus 25. It's just not bad. Of course, it's really the ultimate goal is
more simple.
I don't think
You're all going to have to, pick at random. People need to give some feedback on what was clear about the value proposition and what was unclear. Okay, so the audience still has to do some level of work. You can't just be passive observers. Okay, make sense?
So the value proposition for BEAT admissions is a simple guide to get into college.
Okay, that's it.
Pretty clear.
Pretty clear. Okay. Any follow-up questions?
Is it for getting into like the best colleges, or any college, or like my local community school?
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's mostly oriented towards like the best colleges, but yeah, definitely something I should think about.
Okay. Anything else?
What type of guide?
It's gonna be like a full seminar, and yeah, it will give you kind of like extra materials. Educational, yeah.
Is it an insider's guide?
It's an insider's guide.
Nice. I mean, I want to beat him, right?
Well, it's insider because he is an insider. You're right. Yeah. He's giving you gold here with the marketing.
Yeah.
T-shirt card for him.
Is your customer the prospective student or the parents?
Oh, good point.
The parents.
That was not clear.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Are you guaranteeing it?
100% guarantee, yes.
Guaranteeing what?
Whoa!
No, I'm guaranteeing that if the information is not useful to you, and you want a refund, I'll give you a refund. It's that simple. So I'm not.
That's not the guarantee.
No questions asked.
I want to get into college.
But you get your money.
I can't guarantee someone who's not up to a certain level to get into a certain school, but I will give them a realistic kind of perspective on which schools that person has the chance to be accepted into.
But it's really a full satisfaction or money back guarantee.
Exactly.
So in some sense, that is giving you.
Right, you have to be careful.
How do you measure the
Anytime
satisfaction?
this will not guarantee that you get into Duke or Harvard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good, right? Good
Like, I like
feedback.
that. I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to
Here's
like.
the and write that down. Let the next group go.
I wanted more. I wanted more than Duke. I'm not satisfied with
Yeah,
Duke.
it is.
I want my money
All right, why
back.
don't you guys go next?
So we're still in the process of interviewing everybody, like I'm sure y'all are too. So please just get us up.
So our value, I mean, to remind you what we were, we were Gather, which is like an event planning out to make sure that events actually happen.
Well, just say the value
The value,
proposition.
okay.
Yeah.
Never waste time or feel awkward showing up to an empty event.
Okay, what do you guys think?
Destroying it.
Yes.
The never feel awkward is the thing that when you initially pitched the idea really spoke to me.